China. It's been in the headlines a lot. Trade deals, South China Sea, where the Chinese military has been building out islands to grow China's military presence in that area of the country. And now, of course, China in the headlines regarding the virus that's spreading around the world, COVID-19. But how much do Americans really understand about what's unfolded in China over the last 20 or 30 years? And how much do the students around the country that are supporting socialism in the form of democratic socialism that's being advanced by presidential candidate Bernie Sanders? Academia has romanticized socialism, communism, and these other forms of totalitarian governments to the point that we in America are finding a new generation of students that don't have a true understanding of what it means to grow up in a country that is governed under socialist, Marxist, and communist regimes. We have with us today someone who escaped China after being imprisoned into a Chinese labor camp for her spiritual beliefs, escaped to Australia and lives now in America to help us expose and discuss exactly what goes on in China and what does America have to fear or be concerned about regarding China. There's a huge story that hasn't been told yet, and we're going to start telling it today with Jennifer Zeng. She comes to us from a life experience that few of us can really imagine and appreciate. And Jennifer's going to share that with us today, along with her warning to America to be aware of who China really is. What is the Communist Party of China really about? And how do they treat their citizens, this totalitarian regime, in order to keep control of this vast swath of humanity? Jennifer, it's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for your personal sacrifice and what it means to have escaped your homeland and come to America in order to share this. We're going to tell folks a little bit about what you're doing now. But first, let's divide your story up into 4 chapters. Your parents' story under Chairman Mao, this thing that was called, I think, the Great Leap Forward in order to try to move China out of an agrarian society into, if you will, the modern economic world. The second part of your story is you personally being imprisoned in a Chinese labor camp and what that was like and what you learned from that experience. To now, China, as it relates to several stories that are in the headlines. First, Hong Kong, massive protests in Hong Kong. We'll talk about that. And then, of course, the COVID-19, what many people refer to as the coronavirus, originated in China and is threatening the world. Tell us a little bit about what your parents lived through, this what's called the Great Leap Forward under Chairman Mao and his attempts to unify China in a way that dramatically backfired, and it had an extreme toll on your parents' generation. You grew up after that. You were born in 1966 after that. But what do you recall from your parents talking about what that was, what it was like to live through, and what you learned from your history as Chairman Mao it did something that had an extraordinary human toll for the Chinese people?
Yes, I think the first thing happened to Chinese people when the Chairman Mao or the Communist Party took over China was to have everyone classified. So everyone was classified. You either belong to the one of the social classes. They gave you in the countryside, they have landlords, they have rich peasants, they have poor peasants, or proletarians, as they called them. So everyone was given a classification in your social class. So if you belong to the wrong social class, you are doomed from the very beginning. And if you were born into such a family, your whole life is doomed from the very beginning.
No way to get out of that class. No. You couldn't move from one class to another.
If you come from a landlord social class, you are a child of landlord social class, you are discriminated, you could not even find a wife. So the story to my mother and father was my father also belonged to some kind of wrong class. He belonged to they called it a small lessor of lands, because they are not have so much land of the landlord, but a little bit more than ordinary peasants. So because of that, he was some kind of discriminated from the very beginning. And of course, when the so-called Great Leap Forward movement started in China, I think virtually the whole population starved. One of my uncles living in the countryside was starved to death. And my father was in university then, and he had to be hospitalized. So my uncle actually his body was found in his own home yard. He had a piece of vegetable inside his mouth. He actually tried to crawl from his bed, find a piece of vegetable, and he had it in his mouth, but before he could swallow it, he died. So millions of people died in that kind of so-called Great Leap Forward because of one man's crazy idea. At that time, they called, we are going to catch up the United Kingdom and the United States in 15 years. And because of this, we have to produce as many steels as we can. So they break your pot. They don't allow you to cook at home. You take away your iron pot so that they can produce steel out of those. So all those crazy things happened that resulted in millions of people starved to death.
Now, the Great Leap Forward failed. It failed to produce the agricultural results because irrigation was not done properly. The steel that they wanted to produce to catch up with America and other countries ended up being an inferior form of pig iron. So they weren't able to produce anything. They abandoned the Great Leap Forward. Then you're born and you grow up in communist China. For the benefit of folks that know very little about China, tell us what it was like to grow up in communist China as a child and then going to school, because you got a little bit of a break. You were able to go to a nice university. You learned English. You learned some of the modern authors and stories. You were able to read about America. Many people in China know very little about America. So what was that like growing up in China?
Yes, during the Cultural Revolution, they have...
When was that?
That started in 1996.
Okay.
No, so not 1966.
Okay.
That was the year when I was born. My father actually already graduated from university then. And, in Cultural Revolution, it's a revolution against, in cultural sense. So they actually labored all the intellectuals as they have the blank line kind of people inside the society. So intellectuals was one of them. So as one of the intellectuals, my father was given a labor of the black pawn of some kind of capitalist. So that was anti-revolution kind of crime. So he was relocated to a very small town in a very remote area and separated from my mother. They were not allowed to live together. So I lived with my father alone from the age of 4 when my sister was born. So life was very difficult. We had very little to survive on, and most importantly, my parents didn't allow me to play with other kids, because if you play with kids are having some sort of fighting, and if I had a fight with a child from a worker class,
a different class,
a different class from a worker, that could be upgraded or regarded as a social struggle between the people and the enemy. And my family belongs to the enemy because we are intellectuals. So in many, summer night, it was so hot, and everyone were enjoying a very pleasant, maybe wind outside, the kids playing outside. I had to, shut myself in a mosquito kit, because there were so many mosquitoes in that barbarian, place to read my book, because I I was not allowed to play with other kids. So I spent, I can say, a very lonely childhood.
Wow.
But the benefit of it is I get to read a lot of forbidden books. I had a classmate whose father is a principal of the school. So she had a lot of, books which should be destroyed by the government, but somehow
they were able to keep
yeah,
them.
they keep them
Wow.
because
Okay.
I got to read a lot of books. So for me, it's a very lonely childhood. Had very little to read and very boring to read, and materially also we lack of everything. Everything is rationed out. If we have tickets for everything, you are allowed to buy maybe 4 pounds of meat per month, or 0.4 maybe kilos of sugar, and everything you have
And that's
a ticket.
for a person or for a family?
Depends. Sometimes for family, sometimes for
Okay.
person. So you have very little limited supply of everything. So that's my basic memory of growing up in the Cultural Revolution. So it's a very material and spiritual, and in terms of what you can get, it's very poor kind of and very restricted period of time. So as a child, the most accurate thing I could or most painful thing is I was not allowed to play with other kids.
Wow.
So a very, very lonely childhood.
Let's fast forward to an event that captured the world's attention, Tiananmen Square.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what Tiananmen Square was about. And offhand, I forget what year it was, but even today, it's not taught. Most people in China don't even know, who were born after that, don't even know Tiananmen Square happened. Tell us what your perspective and what you saw unfolding in China when what we now know as Tiananmen Square, where that uprising and protest happened. And then, of course, the face of Tiananmen Square is that one man standing in front of a tank. What was Tiananmen Square about?
Yeah, that year was 1989. I
Okay.
was a graduate school student of Peking University, and the students of Peking University were very, very active in that movement, which I think lasted for over half a year or something. I think it started with very simple reason, because at that time China has already adopted the so-called opening and reforming, or opening to the outside form, and reform their economic system. Because after the Cultural Revolution ended in 1976, the economy of China was almost, at the brink of totally collapse. So they had to adopt. So they start to telling people, we have to learn something from the West. We learn that they have good science, advanced science and technology. We learn some good things from them to advance our own course. So, before that, it's 100% of planned
By the government.
Yes, planned by the government.
Did that mean that they were also telling you what you would do?
Yes.
So you were told, based on your background, your aptitude, your skill set, that you're going to be a chef, or you're going to be work in a factory on this kind of stuff, or you're going to be an engineer.
Yes, so everything is planned. So, but after the so-called opening to the outside world, there is a little part of they want to call it market economy or market price. So for many things you have two prices. Like steel, you have prices inside the planned economy system, and another price outside the planned price system. So for those who can get a share of the outside, because the outside the planned system, the price is much higher. So if you can get something from inside the planned system and sell it outside of that system, you make big money. So the party officials, the top party officials, or who have relationship with the party leaders, make huge part of money. So the corruption there was huge. So,
Wait. We're told that America is a corrupt country by all of these folks that have grown up and learned in our current academia to hate America. America is corrupt. We need to reform the government. so socialist and communist regimes are held out to be ideal because we can end corruption. You're telling us that corruption was rampant inside of a communist regime? I didn't know that was possible.
It's the opposite.
I'm joking,
because,
of course.
Yes, because inside China, all the media is controlled by the government, and you have only one party control everything in the society, including everybody's fate. So the corruption you cannot imagine because you have nobody to there is no watchdog, there is no independent media, no independent legal system. So who can make sure that you don't go corrupt? So the corruption of the top Chinese officials was beyond imagination. Very recently, we had somebody. They found tons of cash in that one particular official's home, and they tried to count how many cash notes he has. They burned over many, those machines that can count cash. They
burned
16,
up a machine
yes,
trying to count the cash that this guy had.
16 tons of cash.
16 tons of cash?
Yes.
Wow.
So that's the kind of, here, I know when I was in Australia, I know one MP got fired from his position because he accepted a $30 something free ticket from some organization. So because of that, people, expose it everywhere, and he had to resign from his position. So when Chinese people saw that news, said, he should have come to our China. In China, such thing is nothing.
Wow.
So the corruption, let's go back to the Tiananmen massacre. So actually, the first initial, I think, motive is just some student want to oppose this kind of corruption, that because of this so-called two pricing system.
Okay.
And the corruption was huge, and people actually just against the corruption. They are not even actually against the party or anything. But of course, somebody talk about democracy and free speech and this and that. But I think the mainstream mentality is they are just hoping the party can improve themselves, can be less corrupt. But even only that, the Communist Party did not tolerate. So they wrote tax within Tiananmen Square, and I think at least 10,000 students and citizens were killed.
10,000 in Tiananmen Square died?
Yes, died, according to, I think, the recent research.
Wow.
I was in Beijing then, and that night I was not in Tiananmen, but I had a very close friend who were there, and he saw somebody got shot. So he called a taxi, tried to get that guy into the hospital, but when they arrived, that guy died in his arms. So he got I saw his shirt all soaked with blood when he came back to the camp, to Beijing University.
Wow.
So I just couldn't believe the government could do such a thing to its own citizen, but that was
that's
very
what's
shocking.
Necessary to
for
a regime like that to survive and flourish. Let's at that time, were you aware that there were these things that you ended up in, these Chinese labor camps? Were you aware that people were being taken away to these labor camps and being re-educated and reformed?
Not really. Yeah, not then, because before that we heard about labor camp, but it's only for for people who committed some minor crimes. They are not serious enough to count as a felony or a real crime. So they were sent to the labor camp. But
so as you went to university and your vision started to stretch a little bit more about the world outside of China, were people, how did people view America? How did people view Western civilization? Was it portrayed as evil? Did people there view America and Western civilization as an evil country, an evil culture?
I think there are all sorts of messages. I think the main two messages the Communist Party tried to tell the Chinese people is one, before the Communist Party came in power, the Western forces want to invade China. So we had a 100 history of humiliation. In the old, when there were no Communist Party, we were invaded, we were taken advantage by all the foreign forces. We had to give them money, we have to give them land, so they owned us. We suffered because of
they said they
yes.
gave you this history.
Yes.
It's not true.
It's not true, but it's because I think the very important thing of this Chinese Communist Party is after they came into power, they rewrote all the history from the very beginning to up to now. So they gave a new explanation, and they also rewrote the dictionary. So if you check up for religion, for example, in their dictionary, so religion is some kind of spiritual or mental opium or drugs that the ruling class used to fool the ruled class. So it
was a tool of government to control people.
Yes, that's their definition of religion.
Wow. Okay.
So they rewrite everything. And I once tried to find South Korea in the Chinese dictionary, and it's not there. So
South Korea is not even in the dictionary.
It's only North Korea in the dictionary, and the capital city. If they listed all the capital city of the world in there, and Seoul is not there, and only the Pyongyang was there. So everything was redefined, rewritten by the party. So that's how they control your view of the world. So for the Western world, when they once invaded us, they try to colonize us. So they owed a lot to us. And now, because we tried hard to earn, to rise up, and now they envy us. They don't want us to be as equal as they. So they try to suppress us. They want to take away things from us. Because either they or us. If we are rising up, they will not be happy. So they will do whatever they can so that we go back to our old evil society when the Western countries or the Western world want to do whatever they want toward us. So that's the main two kind of message. Of course, they admitted the West has advanced science and technology. We learn from them in this regard, so we build up our own technology and society. And then when we are stronger than them in this, we will beat them. So that's the main, I think, narrative of the Chinese Communist Party.
I want to advance our conversation to the point to where you ended up in a Chinese labor camp. But between 1989 and that time and your experience with that, is there anything you want to share with us during that period that's important for America to know?
I think in that period of time, Deng Xiaoping had a very important message: is try to hidden your post, try to abide your time, just to absorb or get as much as possible from the West, and to nurture our own power. And when the time comes, we show our power, but not right now. So I think there were a period of time that China tried to portray itself as a benign force in the world, and they give you a little bit hope if you want to give us a little bit help economically. If we have economic advancement or development, one day maybe we will learn from you. We will have democracy, where we will change politically. They give that kind of false illusion to the Western world. So many Western companies, because they want the Chinese market, they go into there, and the Chinese put on a very friendly face and welcoming and promising a lot of things. I think that's a period of time when they try to cultivate their power. So one day they can achieve what they want, and they can do something.
Now, as a student, how would you go about, if you wanted to study abroad, say you wanted to go to an American university, how would you go about doing that? And was that opportunity open to all students or just a select class?
Of course, a select class. Not everyone. I think in my time, only 4% of the high school students can go to university. 4% out of all.
Even a Chinese university?
Yes,
Okay.
We are talking about Chinese university. But of course, after the opening to the outside world, the government first started send some students to overseas countries so that they can learn from the West, the advanced science and technology, and then they gradually they allow individuals also not government sent. You can apply for American school, university. If you got accepted, you can go. But the story is, especially in recent years, whether you are sent by the government or you go as an individual on your own free will, everybody who goes outside of China would got a talk from the National Security Department. They expect every Chinese nationals to at least collect information.
Really?
Yes, for the Chinese government.
So is it safe to assume that every student that came here had as a part of their mission to spy?
You can call that spy, or you can call that just convey some information. Just they connect. So they call it a people mountain, people sea strategy. They don't have that, maybe that a whole lot of special spies, but they do have a lot. But a lot of these people, they are just ordinary citizens. They don't have proper, spy training, but they are everywhere in the society. They connect. So they connect huge amounts of information. If they connect enough, and if they use big data, so-called of technology, they put all this information together. This information became very, very valuable.
Interesting.
So yes, so I knew a friend actually in San Francisco. She was a Christian. Mm-hmm. She had family in China. She went back to China, and she had a private party within the family, and not many people knew about that. After she returned back, she got a relative who worked for the National Security Department, and that person told her she saw her family gathering photos in the National Security Party. She was so surprised because she said, I was just an ordinary Chinese student. I'm not an important person. I'm not a prominent dissident. But how could my family gathering photo ended up in the National Security Department?
Oh, wow.
And the second time she went back to China, they sought out a talk with her, and this time very clearly tell her to spy on the overseas Chinese people, especially Falun Gong practitioners, democracy activists. So that was given to her as a task. So she was very, very surprised because she said she didn't, she was a Christianity, but she was very low-key. She didn't tell many people. She converted herself when she was a high school student, when she listened to some Christian radio.
Interesting. I actually know some people that go to China to minister the gospel and Christianity there. And I want to talk about that in a moment. Your book, Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom and Falun Gong. Take us into that book. Why did you write it, and what is the message of your book to America and those who would read it?
Yes, I developed the impulse to write a book in October 2000 after I spent 6 months in the Beijing female labor camp, and after I witnessed too many inhumane things, torture treatment happened there. And I was so surprised. I couldn't believe that this was happening in the 21st century and in somewhere only 20 kilometers away from Tiananmen Square, from the Beijing Olympic venue. So I developed a very strong desire to write a book because I think this is my historic mission to document my first-hand experience of what's really going on behind the walls of the labor camp. So that's.
So in the late 90s, you're a 30-something young individual. Yeah. You are learning about this spiritual spiritual method
practice,
called
yes.
Falun Gong.
Yes.
And that's not an approved system of spiritual pursuit by the Chinese government. So you were arrested 4 times for practicing that. And one of those times, then you're imprisoned in this Chinese labor camp. You said you didn't know that this was possible. So you had no idea that other Chinese citizens were being imprisoned in these labor camps for essentially brainwashing.
Yeah, I had no idea at all because, in China, like I said, every sort of information is tightly controlled by the government. Anything
right.
negative.
Censorship.
Yeah, censorship and controlled, and you had no idea to learn. And especially the crackdown on Falun Gong is something very new. Actually, the government initially allowed and it actually encouraged the practice because it has very obvious benefits. One of the top officials, the Prime Minister, I think, at that time said, if one person saved 1,000 yuan for the country, so many people practice it, that's a huge, benefit for the country, so let them do it. But later on, when they found that so many people were practicing it, they become fearful that if somebody within this group of people stood up, say, "Oh, let's get rid of the Chinese Communist Party," then that would be a great part of force there because of the popularity and the sheer number of people doing it. So even if Falun Gong is not a political organization and has no political agenda or pursuit whatsoever, but still it's not allowed. Like they persecute intellectuals, farmers, landlords. Now it's the turn of Falun Gong. So every 10 or 7 or 8 years, they have to persecute a group of people to maintain a kind of fear inside the society. So everybody is fearful. Everybody don't have the ability to question the party's power.
And this is about maintaining control.
Yes. So that's their. So they do it systematically and periodically every 10 or 8 years.
So you were arrested 4 times for practicing this, and one of those arrests, you were sentenced to a labor camp.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what happens inside of a Chinese labor camp.
Yes, on the first day when we were sent there, the first sound we heard is the crack of the electric batons, and then an order.
An electric baton?
Yeah,
What
baton.
is that?
They use electric baton to shock people.
Is that like a cattle prod kind of a thing? What help us to understand what that is?
I think it's a high voltage of electricity that they apply on you, and I was shocked by 2 electric batons on the second day when I was in the shop, and I feel like it's rained, like applied on me all over my body. And that time I felt so terrified. Every time they shock on me, I shaked. I couldn't control the shaking, and I could feel the electricity going over my body, and I feel the whole world is dark, is collapsing around me, and then I fainted away. So that was a tool they used to suppress you and to make sure you don't have the ability to fight against it. And sometimes they use even more batons on you until they ran out of electricity. I knew some people got paralyzed or disabled by this kind of shock.
Now, there's another practice that unfolded in these labor camps where you talk about organ harvesting.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what that is. What is organ harvesting in the sense of the way it was practiced in these labor camps?
Actually, I think as early as 1960s, during the Cultural Revolution, there were, I think, scattered and maybe individual cases of they took prisoners' organs to transplant them to another person. But after the crackdown of Falun Gong, because the sheer number we talk about, there were 70 to 100 million Falun Gong practitioners were there. So I think within 4 months of the crackdown, they arrested more than nearly 1 million people in Tiananmen Square alone, of Falun Gong practitioners within 4 months. So that's the internal number obtained from the high-level official inside China before I left. So because of they have a huge number of people, somehow they've already taken I think organs from death row prisoners before that, but now they suddenly have so many people, detained in a camp. And so I think it's just one step forward from taking organs from death row prisoners to living human beings. So they somehow develop a system. They had everybody inside the labor camp going through physical checkups, blood test, and then they install your blood type, tissue type data in a huge database. And then when somebody needs an organ, they find a match inside that database, and then they killed that person on demand so that his organ or her organ can be sold to anyone who need it. And the system made a huge amount of money out of killing people for their organs.
So who would need an organ? Are we talking about another Chinese citizen, or are we talking about somebody outside of China?
I think it's from everywhere. It's
around the world.
Yeah, around the world.
So there could be people in other countries that would need an organ, and they end up with an organ that was harvested,
yes,
unwillingly, obviously, from a Chinese prisoner. They have no way of knowing that?
No, they never told you. I think earlier on they are advertising, in English and in many different languages on their website. If you come to China, we'll find a match for you within 1 week. And they have a price tag there. For a liver, maybe it's some $17,000 for lung, how much, whatever much of there. They have a price list there. So why they have so many language websites? Of course, they want to attract foreigners and Westerners. Yeah, Koreans, people from Taiwan, from Middle East. We don't know whether, I think, from Israel, from all over the world. When people are in, and they didn't tell you where it come from. They just from some death row prisoners. That's the maximum they told you, or from some dollars. Like as recent as this March 1st, they did a lung transplant for a coronavirus patient.
So wait, they say you said a lung transplant so they're still doing it?
Yes.
This is still a practice that's going on in China right now.
Yes, as late as March 1st. They did 2. They reported about 2, and they could be more that they didn't report. So they reported as an advancement. They found some new treatment to the coronavirus patient because now it's a worldwide issue. So that's the official report. So there are so many cases that we don't know that are not reported. But according to their official transplant number, they boasted they may be the second biggest country that are capable of doing this kind of transplant. So every year it is 10,000 transplants. That's our official number. But individual investigations found the number could be much, much more.
So earlier when we were getting acquainted, we talked a little bit about Western technology that is used in China to monitor people, Western medicine that's used in the organ harvesting, and other Western resources that find their way into China to help the Chinese government do the things that they do. here in America, we have large pension funds. In California, we have the public employee retirement system. One of the high executives from that system is a former Chinese government employee who is now involved here. The other thing you mentioned was that Wall Street contributes by helping these companies, which are state-owned companies, finance themselves so that they can get established and grow. So much of what enables the Chinese government to do these horrendous things comes from America. You have this new practice where it's a social credit card, and the monitoring system of the Chinese people, that technology comes from America. How do we, I don't even know this question. I'm shocked at how much we actually contribute to the suffering of the people in China. How do we stop that?
I think first of all, we should be informed. We should to be educated. We should learn what the West has done to enable the Chinese Communist Party to become what they are today. I think ever since they were allowed to join the WTO, the World Trade Organization, back in 2001, they are developing their GDP, I think, grew by many times. And they took advantage. There were so many loopholes inside this WTO system, which was, I think, created for countries like America, like Germany, like the Western free world, which they obey by the laws, by the rules, but not for the communist China. They never obey any rules, any laws. They sneak their way out. They took advantage of the loopholes in the system, and they grew they steal technology from the U.S. Of course, there are many companies, Western companies, I think voluntarily help with the Chinese Communist Party.
Facebook is helping develop that technology to identify people in this social credit card system.
Yes. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party is actively stealing technology from the from the Western countries. Like I said, they sent their military staff inside the universities, research labs in China, in here. And I think very recently, a Harvard University professor was found guilty by the FBI for stealing. Doing those kind of things. So they are doing this on a very large scale. That's how they are able to develop so fast and on the cost of American economics. So American lost so many, especially manufacturer jobs during the process to China. And because they have the power, they are now have the ability to buy over many votes inside the United Nations. So the United Nations stopped criticizing China's human rights record. So the human rights record is delinked from the trade issues. So they don't have any restraint to restrain themselves. Who bothered? Who cares? So that's why they have the more power to crack down against their own people. And now against the free world as well.
Let me ask you, Donald Trump has been attempting to organize a trade deal with China. As someone who's experienced all this, living inside of a Chinese labor camp, being a prisoner, being tortured, witnessing some of those things, having grown up and, all the things we've talked about, when you see Donald Trump negotiating with China, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It depends how you look at it. I think from one hand, it is a good thing. At least he started to realize that the Chinese Communist Party is taking advantage of us, and we have to do something about it. He used the word reciprocity of some kind of fairness. So we should not let the Chinese Communist Party take advantage of us. We need to ask them to respect the rules, the international rules, and we have them to sign the agreement to agree that they were obeyed by the rules. From that part, I think it's at least better than they the previous policies we adopted, which is embracing China. So this so-called embracing China is actually giving the Chinese Communist Party power, and to appease them, to give them power to do bad things, to do evil things, to crack down on its own people, and to have the technology to steal more technology from the West. And we talk about you mentioned about South China Sea and this
Right.
one road, one belt initiative, that which they have a global goal to achieve. They need to have global political dominance. So on the one hand, I think it's good that we try to stop or try to contain this kind of effort, or try at least to ask you first stop from stealing our technology, and to start talking about to treat each other fairly. Like recently, China expelled 3 journalists of Washington Street Journal.
Okay.
Because they published some kind of article criticizing, they call China the sick man of China, or of Asia or something. And then Trump's administration decided that we are to cap their journalist numbers in America. That I think at one side it's a good step. But on the other side, I do hope that the American government, as well as the governments of the free world, can realize this Chinese Communist Party is taking hostage of China, of the Chinese nation, and what they have done to destroy the whole nation, the whole thousands of years of traditional culture. It's not only very harmful to the Chinese people, but very harmful to the free world. And many Chinese people are hoping that they can live in a country without the Chinese Communist Party. So I think if the Western world can realize that and can help and can facilitate that, I think that is the least risky thing and the least cost thing to do. And I think we should start to figure out ways how we can achieve that. A China without the Chinese Communist Party is a China that will be a real, I think, benign force, a partner for the free world, and which can develop together and enjoy, development
Right.
together with the rest of the world. So that will bring greatest benefit not only to Chinese people but also to the world. So I hope the Western world, the United States, can help the Chinese people to achieve that as soon as possible.
We're coming to the end of our time together. One of the things that astonishes me is that the younger generation in America has this corrupt view of socialism and an idealistic view of socialism and communism. What would you tell that younger generation about the dangers of those forms of government? What would be your warning to those individuals?
Yeah, my only is, the socialist message, the communist message, promise you heaven on earth, but actually they ended up giving you a one-way ticket to hell. That's my living experience. Myself was a party member, but even if you are a party member,
That's right. You were a party member for a period of time.
I graduated from Peking University or Beijing University. That is one of the best universities in China, and I once worked for the research and development and research center of the State Council. That's the top-level government research, policy research and study body. But as long as you do something the party doesn't like, you ended up in prison, tortured nearly to death. So there's no guarantee of individual freedom and human rights under this socialist system, because this system emphasizes the party, the government has the power, has the absolute power over the the society because it has the control over all the resources of the society. They promise you one thing, but the reality, you should just look at the reality of the communism practice in this world. It killed, I think, nearly 200 million people all over the world, more than 2 world wars plus together. So everywhere, whichever country choose communism and socialism, it's disaster. That's already living. I think that's proved by the so many miserable lives of the people worldwide. Why should we still be, I think, cheated or deceived by this kind of beautiful words? That's all the empty words. But in reality, I want to remind people what I suffered. It's the reality of the communism, and the biggest communism or socialist country in the world now is in China. So they took hostage of this nation, of this country, and I hope that Chinese people can be freed from this evil regime and this evil party.
Well, thank you for being here. You grew up in China, you lived in China, you have a child that still lives in China. You feel at home in America now? Do you miss China?
First of all, my child is not in China now. I was able to get her out of China 3 years after I escaped.
Good.
So yeah, I miss China because I grew up there. I love the Chinese culture. I love the people, but it always pained my heart to see how this country, this nation, this culture was destroyed by this party. It is a completely, alien culture or alien system to the original traditional Chinese tradition. It's actually after the Communist Party took power, it's destroy all traditional Chinese values, all traditional religions, everything traditional. It's established a full new party culture, which is, I think, against humanity. I think, cultivate people's hatred. It's rule people with hatred. It's make people to look at the world with hatred. That's why so many Chinese people are really hating America today, because of all of its infiltration and its institution and documentation of this hate culture. It's a completely alien culture towards of the traditional Chinese culture. So I do hope that as Chinese people, we can reclaim our land and our own true culture.
Well, we hope so too. Your book, Witnessing History, One Woman's Fight for Freedom, and your spiritual pursuit, Falun Gong. Much success, continued success with the book. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.